Catherine and Billy for joining us to speak to us in this second part of our second session on our Great Lakes Energy Futures Workshop. So we are going to pivot now from all of that electricity generation and transmission and all of those kinds of talks to delve into another sector that is crucial to our decarbonization efforts, and that is the transportation sector and especially electric vehicles. You guys might have read a thing or two about those. So currently a pretty big deal, and we're going to hear more about it. The folks that are here to tell us about those things are Elaine Buckberg, Catherine Peritic, and William, or you can call him Billy Davis. And let me introduce them before they speak. And Francisco, while I'm doing that, if you can make them all co-hosts so they can share their screens, that would be great. So Elaine Buckberg is a senior fellow of the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability at Harvard University. She was previously chief economist of General Motors from 2018 to 2023. At GM, Elaine was responsible for assessing the impact of worldwide economic developments on the corporation and providing advice on various competitive and economic policy issues. From 2013 to 16, Elaine served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Coordination in the Office of Economic Policy at the U.S. Treasury Department, where her portfolio included infrastructure and housing finance. She's worked in economic consulting at the Brattle Group and NERA Economic Consulting, and in finance at Morgan Stanley. Elaine began her career as an economist at the International Monetary Fund and received her PhD in economics from MIT and her bachelor's from Yale. Then we have Catherine. Catherine Peritic was appointed by Governor Gretchen Whitmer in 2021 to serve on the Michigan Public Service Commission. She's a prominent figure in energy regulation and plays a pivotal role in the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, particularly as the chair of the Electric Vehicles State Working Group, and contributes to the DOE. Oh my gosh, I should have looked up my acronyms for you guys, but the DOE NARUC Nuclear Energy Partnership. Beyond her regulatory work, Catherine is actively involved with the World Resources Institute's Electric School Bus Initiative and the Electric Power Research Institute Advisory Council. Her career prior to all this involved significant contributions to energy storage and technology development, including leadership positions at Instor Inc. and engineering roles at General Compression, Vestas, and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Catherine's recognized as an innovator in the energy sector, and her work spans both the public and private sectors. And she's committed to advancing clean energy technology and policy. She holds her bachelor's from the University of Michigan and a master's in energy systems engineering, also from University of Michigan. And then Billy Davis is a seasoned communicator and vocal advocate for electric vehicle transportation and charging infrastructure in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago. He's the general manager of Jitney EV, as well as the executive director of the Bronzeville Community Development Partnership, and has extensive public and private sector experience managing public information campaigns. The most important campaign of our times is what electrification means to our community in terms of clean energy, clean air, energy jobs, energy efficiency, and a healthy environment. And Billy is working to see all those goals met in the Bronzeville neighborhood and beyond. So thank you, all three of you, for being with us. I believe we're going to cue Elaine up first. And I get to now stop talking and let you take it from here. And Elaine, let me know if you have trouble sharing your screen and we can do it on our end.
I'm still a participant, but you have my slides, Adam. Do you just want to do it? And I'll just cue you in to switch.
Oh, sure. I just made you a co-host, but I can.
Let me try again. Hang on.
Okay.
Here we go. It looks
Sorry
good.
about that.
No problem. And let me get this into full screen if I can. Which
that is working.
Bear with me though. It seems that the Zoom menu may prevent me from getting full screen mode. So if you can share, I think it would be preferable.
Be preferable?
Yeah.
I can do that.
Just so people can see the whole screen.
Yeah, agreed. It's generally a
So
better viewing
while
experience.
Adam's getting the slides up, I've called this what do EVs mean for the economy, but it's actually quite a short version. So perhaps it's a little more EV 101, but we'll talk about the market. We'll talk about EVs as industrial policy, and we'll touch on the long-term economic effects. And if you can go into full screen mode, that would be great.
Yes, I am. I'm also being blocked from. We might be having the same
As you
problem.
didn't know, you have a different problem, honestly.
Yeah,
Bear with
let
me for
me.
1 second.
Sorry, everybody. Let me just here.
Can you open it in Acrobat? I'm sorry for the
Yeah,
technical difficulty.
I'll open it in a different thing. So you keep going and it'll magically appear any minute now.
Right. So some of the takeaways I'll want you to have is one, the EV market is continuing to grow. Despite any headlines you might have read to the contrary, the only thing that's happening is that the pace of growth is slowing. But when I say slowing, it's slowing from like 70% year over year to 40 to 50%. So still a really high class rate of growth. And I think we're getting into a much, go to view, please.
Yeah, if I
View,
can get yeah, right.
view, which is
It's
coupled
so
with,
funny because
could you go
the
to
bar is in my
on the,
way. Yeah, I can't. There it goes. Got to move the bar.
and
Gotcha.
then full screen.
Yeah.
That works too. Wonderful. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. Hi. And so, but as I was saying, China and Europe, though, are far more mature markets, but also a vision for what the US can be like. Supply chains are very concentrated through China for battery raw materials and batteries. And the EV tax credit is designed, especially with the Senator Manchin provisions, as it was finally passed in IRA, to build a thriving domestic EV industry. That's the goal, while reducing dependence on China. From the mine to the scrap heap, EVs involve fewer emissions than gas vehicles. I don't know if I get to this in the 15-slide version of this. And in the long run, EVs can improve economic resilience by breaking the link between oil prices, geopolitical risk, and the US economy. Let's go to the next slide. Let's get into some of the details. So the first graph here, let's go to the next slide. Great. So one lesson of all the market research that GM did for years is that consumers are open to an EV as long as they don't give anything up that they currently like about their internal combustion engine vehicle. So they want pricing to be pretty similar, and you can tell them that their ownership costs will be a lot lower, but it's very hard for them to conceptualize that and incorporate that in their willingness to pay. And there's a lot of economic research that backs that up in terms of even thinking about fuel economy. They want a long range, so they don't have range anxiety, and they want ubiquitous, easy charging, although about 75% of new vehicle buyers own their own home and have dedicated parking. So they can do most of their charging at home, but still people, no matter how many vehicles are in the household or how few road trips they do a year, they want to feel like a vehicle they buy is all around. And then they still want the vehicle they want. If they want an SUV, they want an SUV. If they want a pickup, they want a pickup. And so that's the importance of getting a more robust set of entries into the market that will match people's preferences. But all these things are changing as EVs are becoming closer substitutes for internal combustion engine vehicles. And the two biggest drivers here are falling battery costs, which means that you can put more battery in a vehicle, and that increasing range of choice of EVs in the market. So let's go to the next slide. And so here you can see that EV sales continued rising. So the bars here are EV sales in units. So in the fourth quarter, you were in excess of these are quarterly data, so 300,000 and about 1.2 million for all of 2023. And then the line, which has the right axis, the EV share of total new vehicle sales. And you can see that that reached 8.1% in the latter half of the year. And that's up from 5.8% for the full year of 2022. Let's go to the next slide, please. But again, there's this there's this fiction that's going around in too many journalist articles, not necessarily any of yours, that EV sales are falling. What's happening is that the pace of growth is falling. And so this graph is actually in terms of this from the Washington Post and is the year-over-year growth rate. So first of all, you can look back at 2022, it was over a 70% growth rate, but be careful because that's baselined off 2021 with the chip shortage. Really risky baseline to use. But November 2023, 42%, about 50%, even in the third and fourth quarter. So still a very robust growth rate by any other standard. Next slide, please. And again, I said battery costs keep falling, and that's the big enabler of longer range EVs and reducing the price differential between EVs and internal combustion engine vehicles. And so this is the price of a lithium-ion battery pack per kilowatt in 2023 dollars. If you went all the way back to 2010, it would be about $1,200 per kilowatt. 2023, $139. That's a 15% average CAGR over the 2013 to 2023 period. It did slow down in the latter 5 years to about 8%, but that's still a pretty good pace. And if you think about the amount of resources that are going into battery research that are public and private and really around the globe, my inference is that we're going to see breakthroughs rather than a slowdown in the progress. And the other thing is that as this research happens, batteries become more compact per kilowatt. So that's another enabler of putting more battery and more range in an EV. Next slide, please. The other thing is, so again, range does keep improving. So here we've gone to fueleconomy.gov, or actually Department of Energy's alternative fuel data center summarized some data off of that that I've used here. And the height of the bar is the highest range of any vehicle in market in a given year. And the lines across the middle are the median entry. So if you went back to 2015 and before, the median entry has 100 miles or less. There were some Teslas giving you over 200 miles. But now the top entries, the Lucids, offer over 500 miles, and the median entry is getting up towards 300 miles. So that is much more consistent with buyers' wishes, and market research suggests that people used to be looking for 300, maybe now they'd really like more like 350. But it's getting closer to that. Next slide, please. And then something I feel like I don't talk about enough is that EVs are really fun to drive. They have tremendous acceleration and torque, and they're very nimble. And that's something that, you know, the average American may not know, but once you have experienced an EV because your friend has, firsthand or secondhand, your friend has one, they've told you this, you rode in your friend or drove your friend's vehicle, you rode in an Uber EV when you were traveling, I think that that will also change people's perceptions. And I think some people who don't have a lot of EV experience actually think they're pokey, and it's the opposite. Next slide, please. And so another thing to keep in mind, I talked a little bit about the cost of ownership, and it's lower and less volatile. And so here, these are calculations I did for a national average mileage of about 12,000 miles a year, national average for any given year, the average fuel economy of an EV and the average fuel economy. I'm sorry, we used 2021 average EV fuel economy equivalent in terms of kilowatts and average fuel economy for an internal combustion engine vehicle. And then we use national average electricity prices and gas prices. And you can see that for the internal combustion engine, there's this huge volatility in your monthly gas bill, which stems from what happens to oil prices and how it passes through to gasoline prices. And for the battery electric vehicle, first of all, that line is consistently lower. Your fueling costs are vastly lower, and that volatility is essentially gone. So that means that consumers can expect lower and fuel prices, and just again avoiding that volatility when oil prices surge. That helps break the link to geopolitical events that have driven up oil prices in the past, including most recently when Russia invaded Ukraine through the middle of 2020, and with oil prices being high through the middle of 2022. Not well understood. Again, when I think people talk to more people know someone who owns an EV and talk to their friends, it'll be more apparent. Next slide, please. And really, we've got different regional markets. Sales are really different across the country. And in this stylized map, you can see that it's darker on the coast in California in particular. The most mature market in the country has an EV share of 24%. Next slide, please. But the US is far behind China and Europe. The US has, again, about 8.1% in the third and fourth quarter of 2024. Europe finished last year with 14% battery electric vehicles as a share of new vehicle sales, and China all the way up at 27%. And so almost, whatever is happening in this country, we will be pulled along by the global auto industry. Next slide, please. And in terms of the future, these are forecasts that are jointly from IHS. It is the way it was cited. Now S&P Global and Goldman Sachs published them. And they have 2030 industry around 50% in the US, around 70% in the EU. They have China down at 45%. I think most forecasts have it more like 2/3. And so everything indicates, these are pretty consensus forecasts, that the shift to battery electric vehicles will continue to accelerate, even if it's a bumpy path. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about industrial policy. So first of all, China really dominates the downstream battery supply chain, and that's a big driver of a lot of this industrial policy. They're not so much dominant in mining, although they also often have control or ownership stakes in mining happening in other places, except for graphite. But the big thing, that second section, is mineral processing, and they are really dominant in that. Next slide, please. So the Biden administration has used a lot of carrots and sticks for EV adoption. I'll mostly focus on the clean vehicle tax credits, but there are production tax credits. There are grants to support transitioning auto suppliers. There's money for charging. And then there's tightening of fuel economy and greenhouse gas regulations on the stick side. And while there's some indications it won't be quite as much as announced a year ago, sounds like you're still getting to the same place in 2032, just on a slower path. Next slide. So what are the goals of the clean vehicle tax credit? One, you're trying to promote EV adoption for the climate benefit. I think these are the administration's goals and the goals of IRA. Two, you're trying to support growth of US EV manufacturing so we do not lose it out to regions that are, to China and Europe that are far ahead and become a full importer. And three, don't build up manufacturing while making it vulnerable to potential chokeholds on critical supply chains. I think Senator Manchin's real message in IRA is don't spend taxpayer dollars to encourage a US industry that would be vulnerable to foreign chokeholds. Next slide, please. And so the previous EV tax credit was $7,500 for any EV made anywhere up to the first 200,000 EVs made as an automaker. And then the automaker would become ineligible, as it happened to Tesla and GM. The new one is 2 tax credits, one for this is consumer purchases, so the middle column, one for critical minerals, one for battery content. Threshold requirement about being made in North America. Increasing minimum percentage of critical minerals in that battery from North American free trade agreement partners, and an increasing percentage of battery components need to come just from North America. But there are knockout provisions. So there can't be any content from China or Russia or North Korea or state sponsors of terrorism, starting in this year from battery components and next year in critical minerals. There are also caps that have been imposed on price and on income, so you are not subsidizing purchases that would have happened anyway. And the result is there were 26 EVs eligible for the EV tax credit in models 22 and 23 before IRA, and there are about 8 right now. But there's also the commercial EV tax credit, which is up to $7,500, which can be used for consumer leases. And that's a big loophole where none of these requirements apply. Next slide, please. But what's happening? Well, it does seem that we're getting a tremendous amount of domestic investment in the battery supply chain and the EV supply chain. This is a tremendous graphic from the website of Jay Turner, which is called Charge the Book. And he tracks announcements of new projects. There are 81 since IRA passed, announcements of new jobs, 50,000, announcement of investment dollars up to 79 billion. You can see it's really hits a lot of portions of the US. And also, if you look at the timeline below on the right side, you can see there's just a lot more announcements and activity since IRA. Next slide, please. And I'm almost done, Adam. That is it. Thank you very much. I look forward to Billy and Catherine's presentation.
Thanks, Elaine. That was a great overview. Appreciate that. So Catherine, I think we have you on deck to go next.
Sure, happy to. Share my slides as well. I think that would probably work best.
Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want me to?
If you could share them, I think that would work best.
Okay, we can do that.
Thank you.
And if you want to go, it will pop up in just a second here. I just need to pull it up for you.
Perfect.
So.
Yeah. Okay. I'll get started. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talking to this group today. I do need to start off by saying that any thoughts that I express now are my own, and they don't represent the position of the Commission. The Commission only speaks for its orders. But with that, I'm Catherine Peritic, and I'm one of 3 members of the Michigan Public Service Commission. And I'm really excited to be talking to you today, and even more excited for answering some questions and trying to demystify the regulation process, hopefully over the course of the next hour and a half that we have, question mark. So I'm going to start off talking a bit about what the MPSC, the Michigan Public Service Commission, is and what it does. So we are, and I'll give you a bit more background about myself too, so you know where I'm coming from. But starting with the commission, you can go on to the next slide there. We are the economic regulator for the electric, natural gas, and telecommunications industry for the state of Michigan. So our mission statement on the right-hand side there, which I take very seriously, is to serve the public by ensuring safe, accessible, and reliable energy and telecommunication services at reasonable rates. So that's a big job. These are some important things, and it's really difficult and often a thankless job as well. We've all really come to expect electricity and natural gas services and telecommunications to be available whenever we need it, but also to be affordable. And when it's not, it causes some really big disruptions in our lives, and oftentimes can be dangerous and cause significant hardship. So to add to the challenge that we already have with ensuring the safe, accessible, reliable energy at reasonable rates, we're also now seeing major transitions that are happening to our energy supply and usage, and electric vehicles is a big part of that. But before I jump into the content anymore, I just want to give you a brief background on who I am and where I'm coming from. So as Adam noted, I'm a mechanical engineer. I started my career as an intern for NASA. I was so interested by space and space exploration, and was thrilled that I got to work on the satellites and rovers that went to, explore other planets. Like I did reliability engineering for the rover Curiosity that's on Mars right now. That's still roving around the red planet. And I also got to work on the Juno spacecraft, which traveled to Jupiter to study the atmosphere and magnetic field of that planet. But after 2 years, I realized that we did have a bigger challenge. And that bigger challenge was actually solving the problems that we have down here on Earth, like energy. So I went back to grad school for a master's in energy systems engineering with a concentration in grid power. So I thought energy was really going to be the biggest challenge that we were going to face. And I felt like I wanted to be part of finding that solution. So after I graduated from University of Michigan, go Blue for any grads on the call, I spent 2 years designing wind turbines with a major wind company, and then quickly realized the importance that energy storage was going to play in the future energy transition if we really wanted to meet these ambitious goals like we now have in Michigan. And we were going to need a lot of storage to pair with that big increase in renewable generation. So I moved on to the next challenge, and I decided to move back to Michigan. I was living in Denmark at the time, And I joined an energy storage startup company. We were inventing a form of long duration energy storage. And that work was so much fun that I did keep running into these regulatory hurdles, that the regulations didn't match the needs of the grid and the required advances in technology. So I started to quickly realize the importance of the Public Service Commission. And when a spot opened up, I went all in. And now I'm doing what I can to make sure that we are not standing in the way, and that rather than hurdles to innovation and to slowing the progress of the energy transition, we're making sure that we're enacting effective, equitable, and forward-looking regulations. So our work as a regulator is unique. We don't set policy. We don't enact goals. What we do is we serve Michiganders, again, back to our mission statement, we serve Michiganders by ensuring safe, accessible, and reliable energy at reasonable rates. And let me tell you, I feel that pressure. And I feel responsible when we fail, when the power goes out, or when we are not able to live up to that mission. And for any of you out there who have happened to watch one of our very exciting live streamed commission meetings, you may have seen me crying from the bench when we haven't been able to protect everyone. I try my hardest every day to ensure that we're on the right track and that I am really trying to prepare ourselves for these big changes that are ahead of us. Okay, so I would like to talk about more about some of the progress that we've made in Michigan and what we can do at the commission. But first, I want to go over a couple of mechanics about how the commission actually works first. So as you can see on the slide, there's 3 of us appointed by the governor with advice and consent of the Senate. So it's similar to a confirmation process to serve 6-year terms. I am currently 3 years in to my 6-year term right now. We have significant jurisdictional overlap with federal regulators and regional transmission organizations. So those are the people who ensure that the transmission grid operates every day, who do the balancing, and then the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which is essentially the federal counterpart to each of the 50 individual state commissions. In Michigan, we have a staff of approximately 190 staff members with expertise in accounting, auditing, customer assistance, cyber, physical security, emergency planning, energy markets, engineering, finance, and law. And we operate with a budget of approximately $30 million. All of this is changing. It's all going to increase as a result of the energy legislation that was passed at the end of last year. Okay, next slide. That's a little bit slow. So our major functions at the commission are really what you see on the screen here. So ensuring reliability, like I talked about a bit already, setting just and reasonable rates, and this is probably where I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about, is that's one of our primary functions, is how do we set those rates. Licensing, fostering competitive markets, energy assurance and planning, facility siting and need determination, public safety, infrastructure oversight, and customer assistance and protection. I need to move on to the next slide. And I'll talk a little bit more about where we get this authority. So we are a creature of statute, which means that we only at the commission have the authority provided to us by the legislature. So we have been given fairly broad authority from the legislature to regulate investor-owned electric and natural gas utilities and telecommunications, plus other duties. So this includes regulating rates, it includes implementing rules and conditions of service. So like service quality rules, which we actually just updated last year, which include a faster requirement to restore service during an outage, and increasing the penalties that utilities must pay to customers as a result of those outages. So that's one example of rules that we set. Another example of rules is actually in another very recently enacted piece of legislation is fining authority. So implementing fines on utilities that are natural gas utilities that are not following the rules. We've been able to double that fining authority. So we do not have, this is an important piece at the bottom here, we do not have the authority to make management decisions for the utilities. So we approve their rates, we set some rules, some conditions of service, but we cannot tell them exactly what to do. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So our decision-making process, we're a quasi-judicial body. So this means that our decisions are based solely on the underlying statutory framework and the evidentiary record with appropriate justification. So, so what does that mean? We are really looking at that entire record. The utility will often submit a request, then there's testimony, there's discovery, there's cross-examination, all kinds of documents that are submitted to the record that we then need to look at and issue decisions based on that record. So, and then we issue these decisions in written orders, which are all public, and the entire record is public except for select pieces that are redacted. And you can go ahead and move on to the next slide. And I'm gonna now, so that's the general overview of how the commission works, how the commission operates. And now I'll go into a little bit more detail about some of the things that we've done at the commission over the last few years, focusing on electric vehicles. I did want to just give that brief overview in case not everybody is very closely into the inner workings of how the commission operates and where our authority comes from and what we actually have the ability to do. So now what we've actually done in terms of electric vehicles over the last 2 years. So there are 8 things I'm going to step through, and I will go through them fairly quickly in the interest of time so we can allow time for questions. This is the first one, and this is for approvals in rate cases that support the transition of electrification and remove some of these barriers for electric vehicles. And this is our main way of regulating. Remember, I said that we set the electric utility rates. This is our main way of regulating, is approving rates, approving the cost that the utilities are able to recover on an electric bill. And there really are some exciting programs that have come out of these recent rate cases. So for example, we've approved several programs that help make electric vehicles more accessible to low-income customers and assist transit agencies in deploying electric buses. And I'm going to talk about it, and I'm going to talk about that one actually a little bit more. There's a program that DTE Electric just got approved in their last rate case called the E-Fleet Battery Support Program. And this program allows the company to finance the cost of a battery for a transit bus and have that cost of that battery then paid back on the transit agency's electric bill over the cost of time. So it's a pay-as-you-save program that actually provides financing, 0% financing for the transit agency to make a transition to electric buses more affordable. We've also approved some demand charge waivers for DC fast chargers, and along with lots of other rebates, et cetera. So one key point that I want to make about these rebates is that the way that we have made decisions in the past at the commission is to ensure that we are not allowing the monopoly utility to compete with a competitive third-party market. So these subsidies, these rebates are starting to be phased out. So for example, the residential level 2 charging rebates for DTE, in their most recent transportation electric plan, they no longer will be providing these to non-low-income customers because there's now a competitive market for that, and it's not an appropriate place for a monopoly regulated utility to be playing anymore. Okay, moving on to number 2, on to the next slide. So on this side, I'm talking a bit about planning. So this is another main function of the commission, is that we require the utilities to plan into the future. So integrating transportation electrification into the broader planning process, and also including specific transportation electrification plans, or TEPs, for our 2 major utilities. So you plan in lots of different ways for the future. The generation is a part of the integrated resource planning process. Distribution comes through the distribution planning process. There's transmission through regional stakeholder collaboratives. We now have dedicated transportation electrification plans. We also plan specifically for state energy security. And then all of that comes together when the utility comes and asks for money in their rate case filings. Okay, next slide. This shows, so this is our third way that we are working towards the transportation electrification future is by coordinating with different organizations. So we have a good insight into what the utilities are doing and into what the electric supply and distribution system is going to look like. So we have been facilitating coordination with multiple different agencies that are on the screen here. Other agencies within the state of Michigan, like the Department of Transportation and the Council of Future Mobility and Electrification, but also more nationally, like with the NARUC EV State Working Group, that's the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, as well as with the Federal Department of Energy and Federal Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. Okay, next slide. So number 4, we facilitated a 2-part technical conference recently to sort out some of the details and put together a real plan for how the commission can approach electric vehicles. So this is really deliberate design discussions around how to ensure equitable access, equitable affordability, and design programs that really do benefit all customers. And we integrated that equity component into these discussions throughout each one of them to ensure that this really is going to benefit everybody. And the topics on the screen there. There's also a full record, if you're really interested in this, there's a full recording of all 8 hours of the technical conference with all of the slides that are provided on our website. Next slide. And then we also help with accessibility of data. So this has actually been a big focus of mine. It's really helping to create a richer environment and accessibility of data. So we had this work group, this distribution system data access work group that worked to analyze and demonstrate hosting capacity. So where there's actually capacity to connect to the electric grid, both for load and for generation. And then where that can accommodate electric vehicle infrastructure. So these are now public in distribution plans and will be updated regularly. And then we've also required additional data disclosure to be posted publicly to our website on reliability and on system upgrades. And that is currently by request only, but by the end of next month, I am committing to have it very accessible, just on an open web page on our website. We're just having IT, a little behind the scenes insight, working for the government. We're having some IT issues getting this all displayed publicly. But one thing that I really believe in is transparency of this data. We can't make progress unless everyone can see the data that we're working with. Okay, next slide. I'm getting close to the end. I'm on my last 3. So we are also performing an audit on our largest 2 utilities in Michigan, so that's DTE and Consumers, to better understand 2 things: the state of physical electrical distribution infrastructure, and then also the state of the programs and processes in place for maintaining grid reliability. And it really is absolutely crucial that we have a reliable and resilient electric grid as we move towards increased distributed generation and increased electrification, and in particular, the predicted uptake of electric vehicles. We need that reliability of the system. So this is one piece that we're taking seriously, and we issued the first ever audit of the distribution system last year. We're expecting the results of this coming this fall of this year. Next slide. We also just initiated an expedited pilot process where utilities can get faster and more predictable approval for new energy technologies. And it requires a lot more development in conjunction with third parties, with interested parties, anyone who wants to have an influence over what these pilots that the utility is getting approved look like. And then my last point on the next slide is that we're keeping a close eye on how the IIJA, IRA, and Loan Programs Office funding and financing can help with this decarbonization and the new clean sources. And we actually hired someone, one dedicated person at the commission whose main job is just that, is just getting federal funding all day, every day. So it's really important that we can get as much of the federal money into our state as we can. Okay, I will leave it there, Adam, and looking forward to questions.
All right, thanks so much. So batting cleanup here, we have Billy. And Billy, if you had something to display, let me know. And now we're going to hear from him a little bit about what all this means at the community level, all these big plans and ideas and all that. What does that mean for people where they live, and how can we ensure that that it is equitable access to all these awesome plans? And look, Billy's ready to go.
Well, thank you for that setup. Can you see my screen?
I can, and if
Okay.
you might want to, yeah, if you click slideshow, I'll let you know if it's showing properly.
Like you, that part is there we go. So
Yeah.
first, let me start by saying how impressive this is. The first two speakers, I really feel out of place, but I appreciate your setup. You know, we got this high level about the EV market, where that is, and then, you know, more of a government and regulatory perspective. And I guess, like you said, I'm here to sort of translate how this affects community-based organizations, communities, you know, on the ground here. There's so much similarity, but there is some departure, because I'm in Illinois, but there's so much similarity between the types of institutions and organizations that we interface with. I really felt quite at home listening to Catherine, because I just less than 24 hours ago was in a presentation by our own utility about their grid modernization plan. But that's further down in my presentation, so I'll get back to that and talk about, you know, about the similarities there. But let me start. You know, I'm wear two hats here, and I'll explain why. I'm executive director of Bronzeville Community Development Partnership. The partnership is a 30-year-old community development organization in Bronzeville, which is a historic community. We're the place where 500,000 African Americans migrated from the South to the North during the early part of the 20th century to escape discrimination and segregation, only to discover upon arrival a far more sophisticated form of discrimination and segregation during the era of redlining. And so in Chicago, what that meant was there were restrictive housing covenants that limited where people could live. And so a lot of folks who emigrated to the city that headed south, that lived on the south side, could only live in what was called the Black Belt, or became known as Black Metropolis. And Black Metropolis was actually was a 20th century success story because of innovation and necessity, and the fact that these blue collar, white collar, working class, family oriented populations were not without resources or education. And you know, during this period, there was a lot of innovation and development out of necessity. Because of discrimination, because of redlining, we formed our own institutions. We created our own manufacturing processes. We formed our own banks and insurance companies and transportation companies. And this, the symbol here, monument to the Great Northern Migration, is at the entrance to the community. It actually features. It's made up of, I don't know if you can see that on the slide, but it's compiled by soles, the soles of shoes. But there was a lot of a lot of a cultural renaissance that occurred in Bronzeville. What was significant to us as a community development corporation was to try to preserve that. So we started off as a preservation organization, trying to um, uh, preserve the remaining architectural artifacts. There were like there was there were 8 buildings that we sought specifically to preserve that became the Bronzeville um, historical parcel. But we had as a community as organizers, we had to learn how to become developers. We had to learn how the intricacies, the politics of preserving properties, and then finding adaptive reuses for them so they could contribute back to the community. This shows an early form of jitney transportation that was innovated on the South Side. One thing that I wanted to show, though, that I just kind of stumbled across when I was at a capacity building conference in Oakland, was how during the post-Depression era under FDR, the President Roosevelt's New Deal, was in response to the Great Depression. It was this Homeowners Loan Corporation Act, HOLC. I just want to, if you bear with me for a second. Everyone can still hear me, right?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I stopped sharing because I want to jump to a different source.
Okay.
Hang on. Go back. This is what I get for not having Adam do my slides. I just wanted to show, and maybe some of you have discovered this already as enterprising journalists. This was, and I'll show you two examples of this. I'm not sharing anymore. Oh, there we go. This was segregation by design. It's a video treatment that shows the before and after of the effects of the interstate highway system. And I was looking at how it impacted the cities of Oakland and Los Angeles and ultimately Chicago. So I'll just spend a couple minutes on this. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So this just goes to show the displacement that occurs when large public infrastructure projects like the building of the interstate disrupts communities. And you can see here going past downtown as it enters Compton, how much displacement there is and how it bifurcates communities. And it creates a disruption to generational wealth that persists to this day. So this is Chicago. And I want to show, I'm going right past my neighborhood now, so it's relevant, but I want to show how when it goes through Inglewood, and right here, this green strip that you see, that's the historic Midway. That was the entrance to the Columbian Exposition along the lakefront where Chicago hosted the World's Fair. As it goes north past Inglewood, through Fuller Park, entering this little jog right here as it was going in a straight line. And then takes this little jog from Fuller Park to Bronzeville, going around Bridgeport, where Mayor Daley I lived. I just thought that was interesting. But the part of the story about the housing and the Homeowners Loan Corporation Act was that not everyone had access to these benefits. You know, these were government-backed mortgages with low interest and better terms, and this was mostly during the early half of the 20th century. But between 1934 and 1962, the federal government issued 120 billion in home loans, and 98% of which went to white families. So another part of the story is that this systematic redesign of our cities for the automobile, they, in example after example, were constructed directly through communities of color. And when we look at the history of redlining and, you know, what that meant, how let me show you one more example. Okay, here we go. Sorry. I just want to, if you look at the panel on the left, you can see this is an example of redlining. This is the city of Oakland, where the areas in the areas to the outside are described as best and desirable and declining and hazardous. These areas were redlined out, and this is where this helped to determine the path of the interstate. It got a lot more complicated in the city of Oakland, but hundreds of neighborhoods were destroyed, and you know, most of the displacement occurred in Brown and Asian and Hispanic communities. Okay, so final share. Am I back? No. Okay.
There you go.
Very good. So I wanted to talk about the impact of the cumulative effects of redlining and environmental injustice, the air quality of these communities that are left behind made us particularly vulnerable. So here, this is an air quality map of Chicago. And you can see on the west, if you follow the interstates, the area, the neighborhoods on the west side and the south side are much more vulnerable, and that's where we see um, much higher incidence of respiratory disease, um, asthma. Um, so this is complicated by that's our proximity uh, to interstate highways, but we also Chicago being the transportation um, center hub of the nation, we have 26 freight yards and intermodal yards within the city. The impact of this, as they trace through um, Black and minority neighborhoods, the cumulative effect is that we are exposed to much higher um, levels of particulate matter, which affects our mortality rates in these communities. You can see the neighborhood life expectancy. My computer keeps jumping. Try to go back to. You can see the life expectancy in these affected communities, particularly in the southern region. Then that affects the generational wealth of these communities. This shows a distinction between the uh, the future opportunity for Black children versus white children. This was a University of Chicago study um, that's based on census data, and it just shows that neighborhoods do matter, and that's not to imply that that these um, disadvantages cannot be overcome. For example, the CHA experimented 20 years ago with when we started deconstructing these hideous high-rise um, housing developments and trying to decentralize, moving people out into the neighborhoods that using housing vouchers. And what that showed was that people that were moved um, to areas where there was mixed income did have ultimately have greater access to higher education and to better qualities of life. This was a slide that I just stumbled across this morning that shows in these same neighborhoods the um, the cumulative rent burden, where if you can see that in the lighter areas uh, where they pay 11 to 15% of housing, down to the same affected areas on the west and the south side where they pay as much as 60% in in the cost of housing and utilities. And so it's no wonder that the economic hardship index mirrors so closely the percentage of Chicagoans at risk of food insecurity. And so you start to see a pattern. Well, the pattern is established pretty clearly early on, that the greatest burden falls on those communities of color. So we began, as a community-based organization, trying to preserve cultural history in Bronzeville, which contains more historical artifacts than any other part of the city. But when we move from tourism, you know, trying to develop Bronzeville into a international African American tourist destination, we also began to partner more with our institutional partners like ComEd and IIT and University of Illinois and University of Chicago. And one thing that occurred that really boosted Bronzeville and helped brand us as community of the future was in the early 2000s, around 2011, 2012, when IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, built its first microgrid. And the that created that made that community more sustainable. But our utility, ComEd, used that as an opportunity to get a Department of Energy grant and build its own microgrid in close proximity, creating a microgrid cluster, the first of its kind in the nation, allowing the two microgrids to connect and create a broader, sustainable community that could separate itself from the grid. And that branded us as community of the future, and it opened us up and those institutions into a whole new generation of innovation in technology and research, incorporating solar and battery technology and other forms of, of energy into our sustainable mix.
Hey, Billy, I'm not sure where we're headed next on this, but I just want to be mindful of time for questions and answers.
Okay.
So
let me I'll wrap up here. I just want to get into this last section.
Yep.
Where I'm not sure what, okay, I'm showing, you're still seeing my screen now?
We are now, yep.
Okay, so this was the Community of the Future projects, and if you just can follow my cursor, you can see the boundaries of the microgrid on the northern end of Bronzeville. I won't get so much into Jitney EV because we've covered the electrical vehicle revolution, but our partnership launched a for-profit LLC called Jitney EV so that we could begin advocating for to accelerate this transition away from internal combustion vehicles toward electric vehicles. We thought that was essential for our community. We even envision, sort of the comfort stations of the future where DC fast charging is combined with convenience stores and coffee shops where travelers can pull in off the expressway into Bronzeville, charge their cars, and get refresh, and then get back on the highway, unless they want to stop and visit our community. But I want to just delve into how important equity has been during this administration, and how important it is to this whole green energy revolution. We touched on this, but I don't think the scale of the amounts fully sinks in until we look at how these different pots of money, from the American Rescue Plan to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to the Inflation Reduction Act, has increased the opportunities for communities like ours. And we're part of a network of community-based organizations nationwide that are benefiting from the capacity building in investments like these as they filter through. Final thing I want to get to is, Catherine was talking about the Michigan Public Service Commission, and the entity here in Illinois. I think that's most analogous is our Illinois Commerce Commission, which regulates, our utilities. And we passed in November 21 the CEJA, Climate Equity Jobs Act, a very forward-leaning state climate control policy that is monitored by the Interstate Commerce Commission. And I bring that up because ComEd is required under CEJA to uh, introduce new policies about how they will achieve beneficial electrification under the Act. So this grid modernization plan I attended yesterday. The reason for that was because under CEJA, 40%, similar to Justice 40% of the benefits of this new legislation should inure to economically disadvantaged communities. Unfortunately, while there were many rebates and very forward-leaning initiatives included in the first version of the grid modernization plan, ICC rejected it. They did not feel that an adequate percentage of the benefits inured to the affected communities, which is the purpose of the legislation. So it's being reintroduced in the middle of March, and it was much a better presentation. I won't go into the detail, but I think it's something that's worth looking into. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Billy. So, okay, journalists, you know the drill. Let me know if you have a question. I will say we only have about 20 minutes left for Q&A. So please cut the preambles and just ask the questions. And we'll try to save some time on that. So, Mr. Hawthorne, you had first dibs.
Here we go. Thanks for this, everybody. I really appreciate it. And I guess as an owner of an EV myself, I'm curious, we talked about, or we heard about some of the barriers for EV adoption. I guess I'm sorry for the preamble, Adam, but the thing that gets me, I've got a 2018 Tesla, and when you drive across the country, the car can charge up to a certain amount, and they say it's rated to go from 10% to 80% in such and such a time, but the charging network is, irregardless of the reliability of some of the charging networks, it's really difficult to find consistency in the charging. So you could be in, say, like Iowa, and it'll take an hour to get from 10% to 80%. In Nebraska, it might take 20 minutes. And to I guess as an observer also of all these issues, that even seems to be, for people who have adopted EVs like myself, one of the big hangups, even with a charging network like Tesla's that's supposed to be the gold standard. Can anybody address how that, at least from an engineering standpoint or a technology standpoint, is trying to be figured out to make it more consistent?
Hi, can I jump in on that? And then Catherine, I don't know if you're going to want to add, and thanks to Catherine and Billy for their great presentations. So the charging network's a huge issue. And if you have a Tesla, you're having the best of experiences, and you have a consistent owner of those chargers when you're using a Tesla charger. The reason I came to Harvard was to work on public charging. We've got an initiative called Driving Towards Seamless Public EV Charging to try to address some of these things. And one of the things in focus is real-time data on chargers. So that if you're heading to a charger, you can find out whether it's working, whether it's in service, whether it's available, and how much it would cost to charge. So applying the NEVI standards to everything. But in terms of the experiences you're having, it's kind of, I'd say, a version of the uptime challenges where chargers are not working as they are reported to. There can be some differences in your vehicle. If you're driving a Tesla, you probably regularly precondition. But even so, even if you precondition your battery, there can be differences in the temperature. But the other thing is that the chargers are either not working up to the standard of power they say, or it says, for example, 150 kilowatt hours, but that's actually 150 kilowatt hours for two handles. And if someone's using the other handle, you're getting something less.
75, 40.
And temperature matters. So that's at least I hope a partial answer. Happy to have a side conversation with you on charging.
Yeah, because to me, like, that seems to, I thought, Elaine, you made a great point earlier that most people don't take long road trips, right? I mean, my wife will say, like, the Tesla's a great city car, right? Because you're not going too far, but on those occasions when you do that, it's been a real learning experience, because if you drive cross country, you meet all these people, and they have similar stories. But as you said, you can drive in, and it can be like you can be the only car there at a charging array, and each port or each charger will get a different KW. It's
Right.
just
So
bizarre.
There's three different things going on.
Hold on,
for
hold
one-
on.
For the
You might have to let you have that side conversation.
Okay,
have
I'm
the
just saying,
fun
but we're getting at how do we adopt EVs
Okay,
more
so just
broadly?
super quick.
And
One,
that seems
EV
to be a
chargers
real
have
challenge.
97% uptime standards. Two, a more competitive market will help shine light on these issues. Real-time data that's centrally available would help shine light on these issues and try to, I think both those help drive charging providers to higher performance.
Do you see how quickly she answered that question? Just saying. That was well done, Elaine. Was there anything, Catherine, you wanted to add that the Public Service Commission is weighing in on that? Where did
Yeah,
Catherine?
just very, very, very briefly. So not all parts of the grid are created equal. So there's different abilities for power capacity at different locations too. So as you're driving across the country, it's not all going to be the same, and that's by design.
All right, and we're living through the transition, right? It's going to get awkward, or worse before it gets better. Tiffany, you had a question.
Hi, my question's for Elaine, I think. You mentioned that Europe and China are far ahead of the US on EV adoption. And I know from experience that Europe has regulated the types of chargers that are used. So Tesla has to use the same type of charger as the others. Do you think that that is a reason, like among the reasons that the US is behind?
No,
How big of a role?
I really don't think so. I'd point to a few different things. So with respect to Europe, one, that the environmental regulation around, fuel economy and emissions is tighter and is just advancing more ambitiously. Two, that Europe has always had vastly higher gasoline prices. So the cost savings from driving an EV versus a gas car are probably a more compelling factor. And thirdly, Europeans don't tend to drive the same distances. And so because there's a more robust rail network, for example, and because countries are smaller, when people do a road trip, it's probably shorter. And that means that how much range they want in a vehicle is lower. That means they're probably more satisfied with existing entries, and perhaps always will be. And those smaller battery, lower cost differential.
All right, thanks, Elaine. Megan, you had a question.
Yeah, so I know where I'm at in northern Minnesota, one of the things we hear a lot, EV related, is I don't know how it's going to hold up in winter conditions. That's something I've heard often. I know there's some research ongoing, but I'm curious if that's actually, like, there's actually not a lot of research out there about that, and that is a valid concern, or is that something that hasn't been communicated effectively?
It's a valid concern. And actually EV adoption tends to be higher in states that don't have as low like winter temperatures, precisely because of that. There's variance, first of all. And so I think there was a study that came out about a month ago that Automotive News, among others, covered that what is the range loss in something like 15-degree temperatures across different batteries and so different vehicles. And clearly some batteries perform better than others. I think this is one of many things with where we are now isn't where we are in the future of EVs, because there's so much battery research going on again. And solid state solves many of the problems we have with current batteries. There is not really a commercializable solid state. I don't think anyone's proven, although Toyota claims they have one that they can commercialize in 2026. But I think, and there's just someone should check on this, or check on this before you read that, solid state also, it charges vastly faster, it's more stable, and I believe that it also has better winter performance.
Thank you.
All right, Kelly, I think you had a question for Catherine and one for Billy.
Yeah, quick one for Catherine. I'm just curious if you have any insights into what kind of staffing up it's going to require at MPSC to carry out the climate law and the solar siting regulatory role.
Yeah, it's going to take a lot. It's a lot of new capacity and a lot of new expertise that we're going to need at the commission. I think in the governor's budget proposal was 18 new employees for the MPSC plus 3, I think, for the commission side of the Attorney General's office. Yeah, I think that's what's in the governor's proposal.
Okay, thanks. I missed that piece. And then can I sneak in just a more open-ended question for Billy?
Sure.
There's all this, Justice 40 exists. So presumably the money that's being spent on EV adoption and every other aspect of the energy transition we're talking about should have that 40% benefit. What specific hopes do you have, I guess, around how that money is spent? Because it seems like there's a lot of different approaches or concepts to what it means to achieve Justice 40 with it. I guess what should it look like on the ground?
Yeah. So there are a lot of barriers to adoption. There are a number of reasons why some communities are a little slower to adopt than others. One of the chief ones, in my view, not just my view, is that it's a lack of infrastructure. When you see gas stations on every corner, you even subliminally, subconsciously, that you're not going to run out of gas. That's not the same with an EV, especially in communities where there is a lack of charging infrastructure. It just reinforces the notion, even if you're not going far, that that I'm going to be on my own. And so the investment in charging infrastructure is very important for that reason. And so it's not just private investment. There has to be public investment as well. When we start seeing charging stations installed along the public way, so that they're more convenient, particularly in communities where 60-70% of the housing stock is multifamily, it's not single family. So a single person who buys a new Tesla doesn't have a garage to charge it in. So where do people who live in condos or other shared housing? It's much more difficult to install charging infrastructure in multifamily. Homeowners association has to determine there has to be trenching involved, as opposed to new construction where the wiring, the EV readiness is built in on the front end. So to answer your question, this investment in NEVI and CEJA and charging fuel, alternative fueling corridors and all of that, we need to see more charging stations, and we need to see more investment, more public investment in charging infrastructure.
Thanks, Billy. Sherry, you had a question.
Yes, and I will try to keep the question short, but it takes a little explanation. Okay, so in this EV transition, places like Michigan's Upper Peninsula, Minnesota, places like Ontario have been having a lot of minerals exploration happen. And Elaine, you talked about the importance of supply chains and getting control over supply chains and not having to rely on Russia and China. But some of these places, they don't have EV chargers. So it seems like a real imbalance that, the places that might be providing the critical minerals to build batteries and make this EV transition possible, they are those EV charging deserts. So, like, is anybody working on that anywhere on how to balance that scale?
Yes, so the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act provides $7.5 billion for public EV charging. 6.25 billion of that is towards charging along highway corridors, which are supposed to really span all interstates and get you charging within every 50 miles. So, that would be the first way that gets addressed, would be as Michigan submits its plans to DOT, DOE's joint office, they would have to also be planning for when they would cover the UP. And as a tourist destination, I think that could also, especially in summer, that could also help attract some charging investment. But places that are less dense are likely to get charging investment later, especially where people will mostly live in single family homes and can install charging. Although again, tourism may be an attraction for attracting charging sooner.
I guess I was wondering if there's anything connected directly to communities that host those critical mineral mining operations.
So, that would be an interesting appeal to your state. So 1.25 billion is also for community charging. And I think that the states put in the applications, but communities, I suspect, will in general apply to their states. So,
So it's up to the states to kind of
that might
direct
be
it.
attractive to the states.
Okay.
As a reason to build support in the community for that critical mineral extraction, which does, by the way, result in very substantial production tax credits funded by IRA.
Thank you.
Catherine, is there anything to add to that?
No, there are a good number of programs though through the IRA, IIJA, and then also state-funded programs to support the energy transition and the transition away from many of the fossil fuel plants and towards the more clean energy production, but also usage. So I don't know the programs off the top of my head, but there are lots. There's lots of funding available.
Okay, thanks. Luann, you're next.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Billy about your community organization's focus on EV as a point of equity and transportation equity versus maybe focusing on other forms of transportation, like public transportation. Like, how do you see EVs as being kind of strategic to focus on?
Well, in our community, we actually are not transportation deprived in that we have we're surrounded on all sides by expressways. It's I-94, I-55, and Lakeshore Drive. We also have several public transportation systems. We have 2 Metro lines. We have a green line, red line, CTA. So we have and we have a fairly well organized bus routes that go through our community. There is some degree of last mile mobility, but we feel that all of those forms of transportation contribute to the negative health impacts. So we advocate for the electrification of all forms of transportation and the advent of other forms of e-mobility to address that degree of last mile mobility that exists, so that we can deliver people in clean energy forms of transportation to public transit that is electrified. So, we're pleased that Chicago Transit Authority, our CTA, has accelerated its timeline for electrifying its bus fleet. There is CEJA money available for electrifying school buses in the state. So we are seeing movement. We'd like to see, an acceleration of that. And I was just sharing in the chat. I don't know if it addresses your question directly, but You know, in disadvantaged communities where, you know, cost of EVs is a barrier, the lower cost of used EVs is a factor that is often overlooked. But also, you know, we think, you know, communities rely too much on vehicle transportation. We like to see more implementation of EV car sharing, so that those who can't afford to own a personal car, then can share, can take advantage of EV car sharing.
Thanks, Billy. All right, we have time for a couple more questions here. And I think Audrey has a pretty specific engineering question.
I do, and I don't know as much about it because I'm not an engineer, but I've been reading about graphene, which is based kind of a derivative of graphite, or if I'm anyway, long story short, what is the potential of graphene? I forget who was talking about solid state being a possible solution or approach to the battery range problem. Graphene can store a lot of energy and a lot of power in very thin and very lightweight material. And I was wondering if anyone had read anything about possible use of graphene in EV excuse me, EV batteries. I'm sorry.
Audrey, I just want to say I have not. I think one thing that's also relevant though is artificial graphite,
Yes.
which can break the link of the supply chain through China for some uses of graphite.
Audrey, I think what you raise is what's really exciting about this industry right now is that there are all of these new inventions and new advances in materials and in technology and in batteries that it's hard to keep up with. I've read a couple headlines or high-level articles about graphene and about the potential breakthrough that it could have in energy density. I think that's its main advantage is in the density. But I think that's what's so exciting about this space right now is that it is so quickly changing, and that there's just so much innovation happening.
All right, thanks.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So if you do any of our speakers need to jump off right at one? If so, I can let you go. If not, we've got a second and final question from Mr. Hawthorne. I think he's prepared.
Well, and I'll be more concise, maybe. Maybe. Billy mentioned this earlier about Chicago, and in Detroit would be another example, and a lot of our other Midwestern communities is the freight intermodal locomotive truck traffic. To my knowledge, a lot of this legislation in various states doesn't really address cleaning up locomotives, cleaning up freight trucks, and that is a big part of air pollution in Billy's community and frankly many communities in Chicago. Why is that not as big of a priority as thinking about electric cars and pickup trucks, for example?
I'll start on this and let others jump in. I think it's just harder. Right? If you think about it's hard, like the cost of batteries and energy density. And that's why for, something that's been looked at for trucks, there's talk of hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cells. Hydrogen fuel cells have also been discussed for rail. There are some, like GM has some joint ventures relative hydrogen fuel cells in rail and in shipping. With respect to aviation, I think the focus is more on sustainable aviation fuels. I think it's a tougher frontier.
I think that's true. I think that there's there is some happening though. I encourage you to Google Michigan's Truck Stop of the Future. That's one place where we're investing in a charging hub for freight trucks. Specifically, it's right near the Ambassador Bridge into Canada too, which is the busiest international crossing in the U.S. And I think there is some there. And I think the other, to Elaine's point, is that this is difficult because it is larger, requires higher energy for longer distances. Is that there are other options too. The hydrogen is one thing that we are looking into for long distance, heavy load trucking and freight in Michigan. We're part of the Mach H2 hub that is being funded by the U.S. Department of Energy, and that's one of the focuses. So it's a harder problem to solve. I think that's really what it comes down to, but that doesn't mean that we're not trying.
All right, Billy, did you want to chime in before I wrap things up?
No, I just wanted to offer a free plug for our own IIT, which is doing a tremendous amount, and Argonne, which has a battery research facility. There is a tremendous amount of innovation going on in terms of battery technology and storage, which bodes well for the future in terms of reducing the weight and the cost of batteries.
Yeah, we hope to dig into that a little in person when we get to Chicago and see that campus. So, all right, well, thank you all so much for spending an hour and a half with us. Here is your IJNR round of applause. We're not, I wouldn't say standing, we're all sitting at our desks, but we really, truly do appreciate the time you've given us today, and I hope you're ready for more questions because everyone here is getting your contact information, and I'm sure they're not done asking them. But we truly appreciate this, and yeah, this was a great session, and look forward to seeing the kinds of reporting that come out of it. So